Hi, I'm Shivan Sarna, and I am here with Dr. Allison Siebecker. We are both obsessed with SIBO of all forms, methanogen, SIBO hydrogen, mixed, hydrogen sulfide, and we are amped up because we just had the pleasure of interviewing and hearing a presentation from Dr. Mark Pimentel, the world's leading expert in SIBO and all of its forms, and who is working with his incredible team over at Cedars-Sinai and the MASS program to actually come up with a cure. And they are so close. It's incredible and very exciting. This is a recap from Digestive Disease Week, also known as DDW 2025. And it's an annual event that Dr. Siebecker and I are so honored and privileged to experience post-event with Dr. Pimentel as he gives us a recap and also what's moving forward. So Dr. Siebecker is a world-renowned SIBO specialist, award-winning, and she has really gone deep on a bunch of questions at the end of this presentation. I'm Shivan. Hello. I've written a book called Healing SIBO. Between the two of us, we have helped to educate millions of people about the work, about treatments, and this is our mission. And Dr. Pimentel is full of knowledge. He's a great presenter, and I want you to watch every single minute. Dr. Siebecker, did you want to go over that list of the things that Dr. Pimentel has helped to contribute to the collective consciousness and health regarding SIBO and IBS?
Yeah, he's an incredible researcher and clinician. And here's some of the things he's responsible for. Sequencing the small intestine microbiome. Large intestine was done by other doctors and researchers. Identifying post-infectious IBS, basically food poisoning, as the main underlying cause of SIBO. Creating a blood test that then diagnoses post-infectious IBS. That's IBS Smart. Figuring out the differences between the different gas types and helping them have different names. So EMO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, and ESO, intestinal sulfide overproduction. And then figuring out all these treatments like Rifaximin for SIBO, elemental diet for SIBO, prokinetics for the prevention phase, and also diet for prevention. And then creating the breath test that samples hydrogen sulfide. Previously, we just had hydrogen and methane, and that breath test is Trio Smart. And the list does go on.
And with that, let's enjoy the presentation. And I know you're not going to want to miss a moment. You're going to watch it over and over again. And we're so thrilled and honored to have been able to spend this time with him and to share it with you.
Thank you. Both of you, Allison and Shivan. It's been a year, right, since we did this last. So super excited to be able to be back with you and to share some new insights. And we talked a little bit off the recording that there's so much coming as well. And I always say that, and I hate to say it, but I get this time promises fulfilled. I've been saying we have stuff, and new drugs are coming, and now I can say promises fulfilled. Here are some drugs. I'll show you some new data. So I always want to start with an introduction because it gets very confusing for patients to understand irritable bowel syndrome and SIBO. What do they have to do with each other? And so what I like to say, and you probably heard it from me before, so just be patient. I got to get through this, that SIBO and IBS are intertwined in the way that peptic ulcer disease or ulcers, 60 to 80% of ulcers are caused by H. pylori, a bacteria in the stomach. We're now thinking that about 60% of irritable bowel syndrome is caused by a change in the microbiome. We call it SIBO, we call it EMO. Now we have a new term, ESO, which we'll all get to that, so don't be confused yet. But IBS affects 45 million people in the United States, 1 billion people worldwide. It's the most expensive disorder in gastroenterology. And what's shocking about this is that you have 1 billion people in the world. You don't have a shortage of people to do research on or to study or to develop drugs for. You have a shortage of ideas, unfortunately. And so now with this new developments that I'm going to share with you today, we hope we're hitting the ground running. We've come out of the sand and we can run faster. And so I hope to share that with you. But there's been a little bit of frustration, and I'm going to vent a little frustration today because we're in a strange time in irritable bowel syndrome. What do I mean by that? The early days of IBS, 1980s, 1990s, and so I'm going to spend a little time on this slide. it was focused on, we know IBS is a thing, we know it's extremely common, we need criteria, we need to be able to diagnose IBS because we need to develop drugs. So a noble group of people got together and they developed the Rome criteria. It's a hand-selected group, so a little bit tend towards specific people, but they decided that IBS was this: abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation, plus or minus bloating, and other symptoms. And that became the Rome criteria. And for a time, the Rome criteria were of great benefit. It allowed us to develop drugs. But now in 2025, the Rome criteria are actually hurting us. And it's been hurting us accumulatively for the last decade, decade and a half. So why does the diagnosis of IBS hurt us? Because the diagnosis of IBS, let me take a step back. If you have Crohn's disease, I'm sure those of you who watch TV in the evening, you'll see there's drug after drug after drug after drug developed for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Because in the 1990s, there was a shift, and they shifted away from saying Crohn's disease is a symptom. It's a disease caused by inflammation in the gut. And when they made that shift, you could develop drugs for inflammation in the gut. The problem is IBS hasn't made that shift yet. IBS is still a disease of symptoms. So if you have a disease of symptoms, guess what you get? Drugs that treat symptoms. So if you have constipation, let's make you have diarrhea. If you have diarrhea, let's make you have constipation. And I think the pharmaceutical industry has finally caught up that saying, look, that we have enough of those. We need to think about moving in a different direction, maybe. But my point is, at this moment in time, today, there are no, and I mean no, FDA phase 3 studies of drugs for IBS ongoing right now. That's a tragedy because we have a disease that affects 1 billion people worldwide, and there's nothing, nothing. We're in a donut hole. But that donut hole is important because it's a donut hole because everything's recalibrating. And if I hope it's recalibrating towards understanding and treating the microbiome and some of the stuff we're talking about today. But it's really important to get to the root cause, because if you get to the root cause like they did in the 90s for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, the future is bright. We need to find the treatments for the root cause. And I'm going to argue the root cause is food poisoning for IBS. And that's what leads to the SIBO and the change in the microbiome through immunity, through other ideas as well, like bile acid diarrhea, which we don't spend a lot of time talking about in my seminars with you. The gut-brain axis is part of the old thinking of IBS, that the gut and the brain are connected and there's a problem with the brain. But it's not a problem with the brain. The gut is telling the brain. If you break your arm, your brain tells you there's pain in that arm and stop using it, let it heal. So yes, the gut and the brain are connected. But if there's a problem with the gut, the brain will also respond like it does to the arm. But it doesn't mean that the problem's with the brain and that we should treat the brain. Unless you just want to cover up symptoms and just take something for pain, that's not treatment. We have to treat the primary root cause. And I'm going to talk to you about the microbiome as one of those root causes that comes from food poisoning. But let's start with food poisoning after I've gotten that off my chest there. Food poisoning causes IBS, full stop. 49 outbreaks of gastroenteritis now. This is a new study since we talked last year. 49 studies, 1 in 7 people will develop IBS if they go to a wedding and that wedding buffet contains Campylobacter jejuni or food poisoning. So if you have food poisoning, 100 people, in 100 people, 7 are going to walk away with IBS for an indefinite period of time. It's a little bit scary, but it's also a very interesting development because we now know more about the starting point of IBS than we even do Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, which has all these drugs. So this is really crucial information. But there's another piece of crucial information. There's been this dogma that's been going on for decades that stress causes IBS, anxiety causes IBS, early life events of traumatic experiences. Those are all terrible things, and they all need proper medical management. But does it cause IBS? And this is a study of the US military deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan between 2000 and 2010. And they actually studied, well, did you see people dying? Did you get feelings of being in danger because you're in a war zone, you're in trenches fighting, firing your weapon on another human being and the other stresses of war? None of that practically was a risk for the development of any IBS. What was the risk for development of IBS is, did you get food poisoning while you were overseas, while you were in combat? So being in combat, you can't prepare food properly, and there's a lot of food poisoning that happens. So these troops were coming back with a lot of IBS they didn't have when they left, but it wasn't because of stress. And this is the only study that has studied patients or people through a traumatic event, psychologically traumatic event, and prove that that's not what's doing it. It's the food poisoning they were getting when they were over there. So this is really important to get away from this thinking that it's in your head. It's not in your head, it's in your gut, and let's keep going. But we now know that the food poisoning, and I'm going to make this part of the content brief because stuff is happening here, but there's more happening on the SIBO side. But we now know the toxin from food poisoning that's triggering this, and it's this cytolethal distending toxin, which is common to all the common bugs that cause food poisoning. And it works like this. You develop food poisoning, you get exposed to this toxin, and a part of this toxin looks like a little bit of human vinculin, and then you get a reaction to this protein. Now, this particular form of vinculin, this protein, is present in the nerves of the gut. And not only the nerves of the gut, the special nerves that are responsible for the cleaning waves of the intestine. And when that doesn't happen, when you don't get cleaning of the small intestine properly, you get a buildup of bacteria. And so what we found in animals when we gave the rats only this toxin into their skin, not into their gut, the rats, like the 100 people going to the wedding and getting food poisoning, some of the rats didn't change. The green dots are the rats that didn't change. They look like the orange dots, which are the control rats. But after the wedding, the rats got sick in one of two different ways. Too much E. coli in their small intestine or too much desulfovibrio bacteria in their small intestine. And this produces hydrogen, and the desulfovibrio produces hydrogen sulfide. And what I can tell you now today, based on a publication, which I won't show this schema of, this is exactly what we see in human IBS-D patients, that they have this tendency to have one or the other, or some overlap. As you can see, there's overlap. So we do a blood test now. I use it routinely in clinic, the IBS Smart, the second generation, because that's the one that has the epitope optimization and has the best specificity and post-test probability. And I partner it with breath testing because the breath test will tell me how to treat, and the blood test measuring those two antibodies, the anti-CDTB and the anti-vinculin, tells me why. How did this all start for them? Because you can't get food poisoning again. When you travel, you got to be careful. But let's shift gears. So now we know what's triggering this SIBO, or this accumulation of bacteria. Let's really spend most of our time talking about the different types of overgrowth or microbial overgrowth in the gut. But, you know, there's been this debate or resurgence of debate about, well, is what we're talking about here in this lecture SIBO? Because remember, 1960s SIBO was, you had malabsorption, you had vitamin B12 deficiency, but that SIBO is a very different SIBO than what we're talking about today. What I mean is, back in the 60s, if you had an ulcer in your stomach, they cut your stomach out because they didn't have Prilosec or these drugs that are over the counter, these antacids that were over the counter. They didn't know H. pylori caused ulcers. They didn't even have endoscopy to go in there and burn the bleeding when it happened. They had to basically do surgery to stop the bleeding. And you ended up with these people with very damaged upper guts from surgery, and they all got tremendous overgrowth, like off the scale overgrowth. That's a different kind of overgrowth. Yes, it's overgrowth, but it's a different kind. Methanogens, methane bugs, are only in the colon. That was the myth. We're going to show you that's not true. SIBO is the movement of colon bacteria into the small intestine. I even used to say that because that's what the textbooks said. And that is not what SIBO is. SIBO is not the movement of colon bacteria into the small intestine, not even close. So we'll get to that. And that lactulose measures transit of the gut. That's not true either. I'll show you some data on that. But I will start by saying I know we talk about IBS a lot because that's the most common association with SIBO because IBS is just so much as 45 million people. But there are many causes of SIBO that you need to be careful, your physician needs to be careful of, because if you don't respond to the antibiotics well, or you relapse, or you have these recurring symptoms and you can't get on top of the SIBO, you have to really think about other things. I'll show you some pictures of other things that can happen here, mechanical things. Diabetes, if your blood sugar is high, you're everything, you are at risk for more infection because bacteria love sugar. So if sugar is everywhere too high, bacteria can grow, and also diabetes can cause neuropathy of the gut, which slows the gut, which can lead to SIBO. Other autoimmune diseases, scleroderma, for example. There are other motility disorders. Narcotics are very commonly used, and we talk about the opioid epidemic. If you're on opioids, you're going to get SIBO for sure. And then other conditions as well, and the older age as well. People who are older have more SIBO. Just to give you some examples of different types of SIBO that are due to mechanical causes. An adhesion is when two loops of bowel or the bowel is stuck to the front of the abdominal cavity, for example. But you can see it creates a bend in the bowel, like a bent hose in your yard. When the hose is bent, the water doesn't flow through it. And if the water doesn't flow, you get backup. And if you get backup, you get buildup of bacteria. And so sometimes it's as simple as the surgeon going in there and just cutting that little thing, and you're good. And you don't need antibiotics, and everything just flows correctly after that. If it's simple and a simple single adhesion, sometimes adhesions are more complicated. Of course, endometriosis can affect the bowel because it can latch onto the small bowel and create resistance areas. You can have Crohn's disease itself can cause SIBO because when it's all inflamed, the gut doesn't move. It's thick and hard and doesn't propel, so you can get a buildup of SIBO. There's a thing called the cecobascule, which we've had probably 10 cases. It's quite rare, but it's a twisting of the cecum, and then the ileum gets twisted in there, and you get a resistance, and that causes it. Or sometimes, in extreme cases, tumors, and we have to be cautious to not miss those kinds of things. But back to IBS, this, there was a debate, is SIBO hype or hip at DDW? And my final argument was it's neither, it's hope, because you're actually finding things in IBS patients. And what I said in my presentation is that this is a 25 study pool of 25 studies, and anybody, you don't have to be a scientist to know that almost all the studies are on this side of the line. And that means that more IBS have SIBO when you summarize. There are 3 outlying studies, and critics like to highlight particularly these 2 for reasons I don't understand when there are 23 others. And these are not even high quality. You see the asterisk isn't there. The high quality studies are the ones with asterisks. So, critics will be critics, but the data speaks for itself. SIBO and IBS go together. And even in culture, we know that SIBO and IBS go together. This is culturing the small intestine. It's up to 60%, and that's the purpose of this slide, is to say 60% of diarrhea IBS patients, if you culture their small bowel, they have overgrowth. I put this slide up because this is the slide that proves that it's not transit. Lactulose is a sugar that's non-absorbed. It's a sugar that I principally use to diagnose SIBO. And if you use the 20 part per million cutoff at 90 minutes, so when you do a breath test, for those of you who maybe don't understand breath testing, it's a super easy test. You just take a breath sample, put it in the bag, seal the bag, and then you drink a sugar, and every 15 minutes you do another bag until 2 hours. And at 90 minutes, if it rises more than 20 for hydrogen in those bags, then you know it's in the small intestine and you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And if you make that 20 and you're higher than 20, it's very specific for SIBO against culturing the small bowel, but also that when you look at the machinery in the small bowel, the machines of the bacteria that make hydrogen, they are proportionally increased as the hydrogen is increased. So the more hydrogen you make, the more the machinery is there to make hydrogen. So this is really important because it tells you that the hydrogen is being made in the small intestine. But breath testing is complicated. Back in the 80s, those of you who are older, all we had was hydrogen. Then methane was added, but nobody knew why methane was added, except that a new sensor was available, and so they put it in the machine. And once we had methane, things started to become more clear because hydrogen, yes, it predicts SIBO, but if you had 100 for hydrogen, which is abnormal, you're not more sick than a person with 50 for hydrogen. So it was never proportional. And part of that was because hydrogen is a fuel to make two other gases. The first is methane, and we now know methane causes constipation. And the second is hydrogen sulfide, and we now know the hydrogen sulfide is what's causing the diarrhea. So you had to know all three gases. We just didn't have a test for that, and now we do. And there's a lot at DDW about these tests. But I think in the breath test scientific community, it's pretty clear what's going on. Most of these consensus statements from North America, Asia, Europe, and now Brazil added to this list are agreeing with the same principles that the breath test is also important in irritable bowel syndrome. So this was a study we published 2 years ago. You probably saw this at my last presentation last year, but it's really important because it's the first study ever that did 3-gas breath testing. To be honest, I'll take it a step back. The first study ever to do breath testing at all in IBS, D, and C, and the microbiome at the same time. So this is a very important study. It happens to be 3-gas breath testing, which gives it another dimension of relevance today. But what you can see is that if you have diarrhea IBS, your blue line, you don't have methane almost ever. But if you're a constipator, 60% of the time you're methane positive. And that methane that's what the breath test would look like. If you're looking at hydrogen, the average IBS-D patient crosses that line we talked about earlier of having 20 for hydrogen on the breath by 90 minutes. And, some are below the line, but that's the average is positive. So the majority of patients, about 60% of IBS-D patients, have a positive breath test like this. And then hydrogen sulfide, it looks like a funny curve, but it is higher in IBS-D versus the other groups. But what's more important is the breath test. We're now getting to the point where we can truly say the breath test is not an inaccurate indirect measure. It is an accurate measurement of what's going on in the gut in terms of the quantity of bacteria. So, or organisms in this case, because methanogens are not bacteria, they're archaea. But what we can see is that if you are a methane positive constipated patient, you have much more of these Methanobrevibacter smithii organisms in your gut. But look at this. So this is a correlation coefficient, and these are p-values. Anything less than 0.05 is highly statistically significant, and 0.0001 is extremely significant. But my point is, the breath test correlates, the number on the breath test correlates with the quantity of these methane-producing organisms in your gut. So the breath test is a quantitative test, not a qualitative test. I hope that makes sense to you. So it is truly measuring what's going on in the gut. This is for methane. I'm going to talk about hydrogen sulfide here in a moment. But continuing on the methane track, this is now in press. So you'll see the published version of this paper probably within 2 weeks because it's already accepted. But this was presented at DDW last year, so this information is public and I can share it with you. But methane on the breath test. So this is the first study ever where you take a breath test and then right after that, you put a camera into the gut, You take juice from the human small intestine and you do shotgun sequencing of that juice, which means you see everything that's there. And what we see is the more methane producers in the gut. The more methane on your breath, the more of these bugs are in the gut. But remember I said at the beginning, a myth was M. smithii is not in the small intestine. 63% of these cases, it was M. smithii. This is the one that's the most common. So methanogens live in the small bowel. This is the reason people thought they didn't is because they don't like oxygen and there's more oxygen in the small bowel. But there they are. They manage. And this is, again, showing that the breath test is showing what's in the small intestine. Not just that, this study from Telamentis from last year, which is Stanford, they showed that when you have methane in the breath, your SMART pill, a test that measures how fast things move through the small intestine and the colon, is slower, the gut's slower. So that is the constipating effect of methane. Now let's talk about hydrogen sulfide. Wow, hydrogen sulfide didn't take long to play catch up because now we're all caught up to the other gases. This is the first time in history you measure hydrogen sulfide in breath and you have shotgun sequencing of the small intestine. And the number one character there is a very avid hydrogen sulfide producer called Proteus mirabilis. And this organism is in the small intestine proportionally to how much hydrogen sulfide you have on your breath. And the more of these hydrogen sulfide producers you have in the gut, in the small intestine, the higher the hydrogen sulfide on the breath. Now, if you think this isn't causing the diarrhea and the hydrogen sulfide in the breath, here's a rat study. We gave the rats desulfovibrio. We gave them fusobacterium. These are hydrogen sulfide producers we found in IBSD, and they get diarrhea because you can see that for this curve compared to this curve, and they get hydrogen sulfide in their breath. And so, not in their breath, in their stool, sorry. This is a stool measurement of hydrogen sulfide. So these bugs cause the diarrhea we're talking about in DIBS. So now at DDW, and this paper is in progress at a journal right now. We haven't got a full acceptance yet, but we're waiting for that. But we presented this at DDW. There's 3 posters on one of the largest breath test studies ever done. So this was the 3-gas breath test sent to 6,000 people across the US, almost every state, over 1,500 doctors prescribing the breath test. Some of the doctors ordered glucose, some of them ordered lactulose. We've always said that glucose is more specific if it's positive, meaning if it's positive, you definitely have overgrowth. The problem is it misses overgrowth. That's what we always thought. And that the glucose gets absorbed, and so it doesn't have the ability to detect further down. And that's what we saw exactly here. So early on in the breath test, this is 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, the breath test, hydrogen is even higher with glucose than lactulose. So you're getting a good, in that upper gut, you're getting some ability to detect things. And then the glucose is gone. It's burned out. And you can see all of that going down. It's exhausted the glucose, or the glucose is gone from the gut because you absorbed it. Whereas lactulose keeps going up. But that's not the important part. That's how the breath test is working with the 2 sugars. The important part is look at the SIBO detection with, or if I may, let's look at overall, no matter what they have, right? But let's talk about SIBO first. 7% is detected with glucose, 27 with lactulose, but that's SIBO only. If you look at anything, it's even more big of a difference. But my point is it's missing a whole bunch of patients. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that if you looked at the severity of the diarrhea of patients who are negative on glucose, it's higher than the severity of the diarrhea of people who are negative on lactulose. Super hard to understand what I'm saying, but it means that the glucose being negative There's a bunch of people who are sick still that are being picked up on lactulose. And so those people negative on glucose are missing out on getting treatment because the glucose was negative. And that's important. But on the positive side for glucose, just to say this for a moment, the glucose does pick up the same in terms of intestinal sulfide, that hydrogen sulfide, and it picks up the same, relatively the same, maybe even higher for intestinal methanogen overgrowth, but it's not statistically different. So don't put too much emphasis on the difference in percentages because it's not statistically different. So this was a massive study showing that if you want to measure for SIBO, glucose is not as good as lactulose. But hydrogen sulfide, this is across the nation. Hydrogen sulfide, the more severe your diarrhea, the higher the hydrogen sulfide on the breath test. And this is real, and urgency is more as well. But now let's look at hydrogen sulfide even more advanced. So we've not only proved the breath test part, we've now taken it way past what we've ever known about hydrogen sulfide. And we've done this for methane too, and we've done this for SIBO as well. But hydrogen sulfide is a dramatic effect on the gut. So basically what we're doing here is we're taking the breath, we measure the hydrogen sulfide. When the hydrogen sulfide is elevated versus not elevated, we take the biopsy of the tissue from the small intestine of that individual with that hydrogen sulfide, and we look at what genes, what things are being produced abnormally, up or down, and a ton. It's a ton of things that are changed, and these are some of them here, and I'm not going to get into all the complicated things here. What I'm going to show you is the next slide that summarizes this. You get changes in your energy pathways of the gut. The higher the hydrogen sulfide, the cell is basically, if in super high levels, is dying. In mid levels is just energy, in an energy deficit. It's having trouble. Then there's immune response pathways that are changed. Fluids shifts are changing. So meaning the cells are letting fluid out too much, too easily. And that's what causes the diarrhea. Nociception, which is your ability to feel pain from the gut, those pathways are elevated. And motility pathways, meaning things are moving too fast, are also changed. So sulfur can actually explain a lot. And look, if you give animals the hydrogen sulfide producer, as I showed you earlier, you get all the same pathways, unless you give animals a bug that doesn't produce hydrogen sulfide, the E. coli on the right. It only has a couple of these pathways. So it's really caused by the bugs that produce hydrogen sulfide. So now that we know the kids, we know these bad kids that are causing this. We have the traditional SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which we now know is not colon bacteria, just two bugs, E. coli and Klebsiella cause SIBO. On the methane side, there are other bugs, but Methanobrevibacter is too high in the small bowel, too high in the colon, so it's all across the gut. In ESO, it's a little more complicated. Too high Proteus in the small bowel, plus desulfovibrio and desulfosarcina. And in the colon, it's majorly desulfovibrio and fusobacterium. So ESO is also a pan-gut problem. This is a very complicated slide. It just basically, this was a study that was done since we last spoke a year ago, that the bugs that are responsible for IBS, this is a meta composition of every microbiome study ever done in IBS. And it basically shows you that the bugs that we're talking about, E. coli, fusobacterium, are driving the effect. And then when rifaximin works, it makes the gut microbiome normal, or closer to normal, and it works by getting rid of the bugs we were talking about on the previous slides. So how do we treat? Rifaximin is FDA approved. It was approved in 2015. This was a paper from 2011, a New England Journal paper. Rifaximin makes IBS better, and it was approved by the FDA on the premise that part of IBS is a microbiome problem, that now, 10 years later, we have a much clearer understanding is a change in the small bowel microbiome, and specifically SIBO. This breath test was done in one of those trials for the FDA. And you can see that if your breath test is positive, your chance of responding to rifaximin jumps from 44 to 56. If the rifaximin made the breath test normal, your response to rifaximin, 76% of people who met that criteria responded. But now we have meta-analyses of trials of rifaximin for SIBO. There are 32 studies, and rifaximin works for SIBO specifically. If you have IBS and you did a breath test and it's positive in this meta-analysis, you're more likely to respond to antibiotic treatment. So doing a breath test should be part of the algorithm for IBS. And then people are trying to push back to antidepressants. Recently, there's a lot of push to go back to antidepressants based on various, based on one trial at least. And I go back to this, and then we did another study which just got published. I haven't created the slide yet, but it's basically saying the same thing. If you give tricyclic antidepressants to your IBS patients, for every 2.3 people who would get better because of the tricyclic, one person has to stop the drug because it gives them a very bad side effect enough that they don't want to take it anymore. That's pretty bad for a drug. Rifaximin, 846 people would get better with rifaximin before one person would say, I don't feel good on this drug, I'm going to stop it. So in trials, these were in clinical trials. So that is the difference in terms of safety. And I already told you, it brings the microbiome closer to normal. It doesn't make the microbiome worse by taking rifaximin. If anybody says that, they need to read the papers, because that is exactly the opposite. The rifaximin is getting rid of the E. coli and Klebsiella, allowing the microbiome to recover to what it once was. And so that is not how rifaximin works. It's not like taking a broad spectrum ciprofloxacin or one of those kinds of antibiotics. But for methane and constipation, then we have to give rifaximin and neomycin. And this was a study that I've showed you many times. For hydrogen sulfide now, it's bismuth. It's what we do because of this study from the 1990s, but more is coming, and I'll show you that here in a minute. A new study came out showing elemental diet, this new tasty elemental diet, or what they call palatable. It's very effective. This is the breath hydrogen before, and this is the breath hydrogen after. This is the breath methane before and the breath methane after taking the elemental diet. And these are the symptoms. Basically, the symptoms are all getting better. Now I'm going to talk to you about two things before I wrap up and go to questions, and that is this product called CS06. So this is a drug that binds to a protein enzyme in the methane organism, specifically that bug I've been talking about, Methanobrevibacter. Remember I said, once we know the bugs, we can develop the drugs. This is a drug that when it goes in there, it drops methane in human stool, in rat stool by 70%, 60 to 70%. And you can see here, this is an animal study. So these animals have constipation and methane. And when we gave the drug, their wet weight of the stool went up statistically, and the methane in the stool went down statistically. So we have a drug that reduces methane and improves constipation, at least in animals for now, and we're working towards the first human study, we hope, within the next 12 months. On the hydrogen sulfide SIBO front, we've always known, or at least always since this paper, known that these are the actors: Klebsiella, E. coli, desulfo, Proteus, Fuso. You've heard all these names. A lot of them like to live in the mucus of the small intestine, as well as the thin fluid layer of the small intestine. Rifaximin cannot penetrate the mucus because it's so thick. And these guys swim. You can see you can see it here beautifully. This is the actual picture of E. coli. It swims, so it likes to be in the mucus, and it protects it so it can stay there. So if you just get rid of these E. coli, these can come and repopulate and bring your symptoms back sooner, possibly. So the idea came about to maybe give a mucolytic with the rifaximin. And so we did that. This was a human study. This was a plenary session at DDW. We gave humans rifaximin, the usual dose that's FDA approved. And this is before and after in those humans who got this drug. And you can see abdominal pain's better, gas is better. Some of the other ones are getting close, but they're not there. Look what happens when we added rifaximin and NAC. More things got better. So NAC dissolving the mucus allows the rifaximin to get to those bacteria better. And I'm going to prove it to you because this is not just the symptoms. I'm going to prove it to you by looking at the microbiome. But it did it because it got hydrogen sulfide down. Look at this. This is what drove the effect. The hydrogen sulfide was most reduced in the rifaximin and NAC group. The sicker patients had more hydrogen sulfide in that study as well, by the way. And this is the microbiome. We did the microbiome in this study before and after. And what differentiated the NAC group from the regular rifaximin group is that the NAC addition to this lower dose rifaximin reduced E. coli, Klebsiella, desulfo, and fuso more by having that NAC present. And those are the major players of SIBO and ISO. So we now have something marching through. We're starting the phase 2B study. We're getting through the FDA at a more advanced level than CSO6. We're getting through the FDA with a new thing that could be much better for IBSD, much better for hydrogen sulfide and hydrogen. And then we hope by getting it down even further that the relapses are less or it doesn't relapse. So here's what we have. This is what I do right now is if it's let's start with SIBO. If it's SIBO, I give rifaximin, and then I use the elemental diet and biota if the rifaximin doesn't work. If it's intestinal sulfide overproduction, I give rifaximin with Pepto-Bismol. The elemental diet can work there as well. Intestinal methanogen, again, the elemental diet works there, but rifaximin and neomycin or rifaximin and metronidazole are the other ways to do it. The elemental diet is more challenging because you have to be on a liquid for 2 weeks. And so sometimes the antibiotics are much more easy to do. And of course, the future is this new drug that has the NAC in it for the diarrhea side, CSO6 for the constipation side. And we have about 8 to 12 months before we have something that could drop the antibody in the blood of a human patient with IBSD that we think could really address the root cause from food poisoning. So you're going to have to stay tuned for that one. So IBS is a disease, not a syndrome. Look at all the stuff I've showed you today. This is a disease that has a lot of biomarkers. It has a very defined pathophysiology, at least for that 60%. Food poisoning is the cause of IBS, 60% of cases, I believe. Blood test, we have a blood test that can say you have IBSD based on food poisoning. You could know. A 3-gas breath test, this new 3-gas breath test is the most validated breath test in history. There's never been a breath test where they went through the rigor of a 6,000 patient trial or the rigor of and the rigor of comparing it to the microbiome, shotgun sequencing, both stool, small intestine, and these clinical trials showing that the drugs are working because of these gases. So this is not your grandpa's SIBO. This is not that old school SIBO. This is a very specific type of organisms developing in the gut that are causing these symptoms. And new treatments are coming. You saw 2 of them, 3 of them, maybe 4 of them today. You saw the elemental, you saw the combination with NAC, you saw the CSO6, and the new thing to treat the antibodies coming soon. So we are here. And it's difficult now because funding is challenging. It's not like it used to be. And so we're on the precipice of getting these things done, and funding has become even more difficult as we get to this point. But we'll grit and bear it and continue onwards. So thank you.
I wish that I had a sound machine that was like a crowd going wild. Like amazing. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited. Well done, well done, well done. Thank you. That was beautifully expressed. And the accomplishments, please send our love and gratitude to all of your teams, because I know they're working so diligently, and I know that the funding situation must be horrifying and scary and all of that. Wow. Okay, Allison, Dr. Siebecker, go ahead. I don't want to hold up because I know you have a ton of questions, and then I'll
Of course, thanks. You always let me go first with all my questions. That was
Sure.
fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Mark. And as Shivan said, thank you so much for all the work you and your team consistently do to help us all and help us get better. This is amazing. I was so excited to read about, and as you explained, this new molecule or drug, CSO6 for methane. And of course, you touched on it. But it was so exciting to read in your study that actually the methane came down by 70% in 4 hours with this molecule. And in animals, by 24 hours, there was like no methane after 24 hours. So this is so incredible. And in this study, it explained that what it's doing is working on the MTD enzyme, a very long name of an enzyme, multisyllabic. It's like how many syllables can you get in the name of something? So MTD for short.
Yes.
So how does that relate to methane? And basically, you know, what you were saying is it's blocking it. Why do we want to block this enzyme?
So, I mean, I've always said in my presentations, especially, you know, when we talk to drug companies, when we're trying to encourage them to develop new things and stop this donut hole from happening, which we're now in with IBS, but is that we need, in the microbiome, there's a group of people developing probiotics, which is one way to handle the microbiome. There's another group taking chemicals from the bacteria and using them as drugs. But there's nobody developing drugs for the microbiome, and that's us. I mean, that's what we're doing. And basically, we're not killing the bug. We're not here to do another antibiotic. We're here to say, okay, you're producing this stuff, it's making people sick. Let's tell you to produce less methane. It doesn't have to be zero, it just has to be less so the patient feels normal again. And I think that's the key, because methanogens are important for your gut. You shouldn't have zero methanogens, but if we can get them to just, hey, dial it back a bit, because you know it's like anything else. You have too little of something, it's no good. Too much of something, it's no good. And we're in the too much of something situation, and we're just trying to pull it back a little bit. It's the same thing with hyperthyroidism, right? You have too much thyroid, you dial it back to normal. You don't want to get rid of the thyroid. You don't try and destroy the thyroid to get the thyroid to stop. You want to just dial it back. And that's sort of what these bugs are doing. They're producing too much.
So this enzyme is just blocking it, will stop the production type of thing?
Yeah, it's one of the enzymes key in the chain to convert hydrogen to methane inside that bacteria or that methanogen.
Amazing. And what about human trials for this?
So you can't do human trials, not even for fun. I mean, the FDA regulates that you have to go through a certain process, toxicity studies, PK studies, which is, does it get absorbed? Does it not get absorbed? We're doing all that kind of stuff right now. We've come a long way, as I can't tell you. We've done 20 or 30 mini studies of what the FDA needs. We have another 20 to go. So there's small studies, little things that we have to do, chemical stability, all that kind of stuff. And all those things are being done on the fly right now. They're happening as we speak. So we hope that we've checked all the boxes. Within 8 to 12 months, we go to the FDA and say we want to do our first in-human study and start in humans.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, when that happens, I hope there'll be announcements posted, and I'd love to share it in case you need any recruitment, because I have a feeling a lot of people are going to want to join that study.
Yeah, unfortunately, the first study is called a phase 1 study for your audience, and it's usually about 10 or 20 patients for that first study, just to see the signal. So that's not a study that's hard to recruit, because off the top of my head, I have 100 patients here that could do it. So we don't need recruitment for that. But once we finish that study, then we go to the phase 2, which is usually a few hundred, and that's the one where we will need help recruiting. But that happens very quickly in sequence. So we're marching along. So
Huge congratulations on that.
Yes.
Okay, now another treatment for methane that you talked about, that you studied, was elemental diet, palatable elemental diet. And I just wanted to highlight that again, because So many patients, as you mentioned, and so many docs, they don't want to do it. And,
Right.
but you know, your study showed it's so effective. It's so effective at, you know, reducing the M. smithii. This is what your study showed. It reduced the M. smithii in stool. That corresponded to breath methane coming down and symptoms coming down, constipation coming down, and other symptoms. So I just wanted to highlight how important it is that, you know, you've gotten this study out there showing, and remind everyone how effective of a treatment that is, and not to forget about it, really.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, one of the things we talked offline a little bit about was this refractory SIBO, or the patients who don't respond, and it's just like any antibiotic. First of all, we don't have this Rifaximin NAC special one where it releases in the small intestine, that new NAC combo that's coming next, you know, coming in trials in August. It's coming, but we don't have it yet. So, you know, rifaximin can't penetrate all of the layers. So we do have some patients who escape the treatment. They don't get better with rifaximin. This doesn't suffer that. So we think it works better in those patients who are refractory. So, but it's expensive. It costs money to the patient, and sometimes, and physicians are, you know, an elemental diet and just liquid for 2 weeks. Doctors don't want to hurt people. We don't want to hurt people. But we've had a lot of experience with this over the years, a few thousand patients doing elementals diets. So we know it's perfectly safe, and the trial was perfectly safe. No changes in any blood work or anything like that. So it's a matter of doctors getting comfortable with using it, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to point out, on the expense front, remember that you're not actually eating food during those 2 weeks, so you don't have your grocery bill at the same time. So you have
And
to
with the
factor
price
that in.
of eggs, Allison, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one thing that study, that in your study, that it showed was not everyone had M. smithii in the stool who were positive for methane. Could you talk about that?
So, and this is why IMO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, and ISO, intestinal sulfide overproduction, are a little more complicated than SIBO. SIBO actually is the simplest of the three now, because you have regional differences. So in the colon, you have this desulfovibrio and fusobacterium. In the small bowel, you have Proteus. In methanogens, you may not have it in the stool, but you might have it in the cecum, you might have it in the small bowel, and you're not picking it up in the stool as much. So, or vice versa. So we have some patients where we don't pick it up in the small bowel, but we pick it up in the stool. And that's why they're not small intestinal methanogen overgrowth. It's intestinal methanogen overgrowth. Because in terms of methane, it's the quantity of methane saturating your intestine that's causing the constipation. So it doesn't matter if it's coming from the colon or the small bowel. It may have like slight different effects on symptoms. But you know, because if you slow your small bowel down, maybe you get more nausea, maybe you get more GERD than if you slow your colon down, because that's where all the methanogens are, where you have more constipation. So we're trying to dissect those. You can't tell from the breath test where it's coming from. All you know is it's high. But with sequencing, we can. So
Well, that makes me think of something else. There are functional stool tests now that actually they've added in analyzing for M. smithii and desulfovibrio. And I was wondering your opinion on that. Do you find that, you know, that's helpful? Is that helpful for docs using them to identify large intestine, you know, methanogen overgrowth or hydrogen sulfide overgrowth?
it still doesn't tell you where they are. It tells you they might be in the colon. Okay. The problem is, if we go super, super deep sequencing, everybody has M. smithii in the colon, even a little bit. So the question is, what is normal? And we have one study that we published where you don't see methane on the breath until the M. smithii in the stool is more than uh, a million per ml, what 10 to the sixth in the stool. So, you know, below that, you're not constipated. So it's kind of a, you know, if you say they have M. smithii in the stool, that doesn't mean that's a high level for them. And you know, the breath methane though is very, very driven. So I know for a fact that anybody who's over 10 parts per million on methane on their breath is almost always constipated. Almost always. There are exceptions, as you and I always discuss on these calls. But yes, almost always constipated.
Yeah, thank you so much because that's exactly was my opinion. Basically, can we trust, like the lab is deciding what to call positive? And
Correct.
to my understanding, that the data hasn't been published and the work hasn't been done to say in the stool what levels truly are valid for EMO or methanogen overgrowth.
Yeah, I can say it a little bit more in a more complicated way, but basically when you do sequencing or PCR or these kind of techniques of to quantify microbes in the gut, there's shallow shotgun sequencing, which is very cheap, which most companies would do because it's super cheap. There's moderately deep shotgun sequencing, and then there's deep shotgun sequencing. What that means is you spend a lot more money, you use less wells, and you sequence every single tiny fragment of DNA that's in there. And so the deeper you go, the more likely you are to find the rare Smithy eye or the rare. And so the question is, where is the truth? Well, the truth is in the deepest because you're seeing every single thing. The question is, I don't know where they've set their bar. And they can set it anywhere along that spectrum. And if they set it super shallow, then they're missing a bunch because Smithy eye is a little bit, it's on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of bacteria in the gut. Bacteria in the gut are so much higher than 10 to the sixth. So they'll swamp out the M. Smithii. So I don't know where they're setting their thermometer. And so this is the reason why that, conventional labs, LabCorp, Quest, these companies, they're not doing this kind of thing on stool yet, even though the microbiome's been around for 15, 20 years, because they understand that there's so many different thermometers you can use for measuring stool, and they don't have a good answer to the question yet. Now labs are doing it, and then they're purporting their results, but you need a 2,000 patient study with their results to say, is it correlating with symptoms or not? Is their method working? And I haven't seen those. I would put it in my slides if I saw it.
Shivan,
Dr. Siebecker, let me know when I can get in here with a question.
Go right ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
I have tons more, by the way.
I'm sure you do. Well, I'm just going to chime in with a couple, just kind of following up. For the Rifaximin, a lot of patients, the clients that whatever, our community, some of them are like, I can't wait to get it. I'm going to even go to Canada if I have to. I'm just like, I'm full steam ahead with Rifaximin and whatever combination. Some people are really afraid because of the stigma associated with, overdoing antibiotics, or just they're afraid of antibiotics. They have a lot of just fear in general, from food triggers, all the above. What would you say to someone who comes to you and says, I'm scared to take Rifaximin? I know it's a special antibiotic and all that, but it's the neomycin or the metronidazole component. Like, let's say I have a crush on Rifaximin. Okay, I get it. It's fine. But these other two that are more systemic, what would you say to a person who might be afraid of those?
So the worry about antibiotics is microbial resistance or antibiotic resistance, right? That's one worry. The other is, are you hurting your microbiome?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I already showed you in this very complicated, massive slide that, and I didn't point to the things, but they basically showed that getting rid of the bad actors means the microbiome comes back beautifully. You're not taking the antibiotic for a long time. You're taking it for 2 weeks. And Rifaximin's been around for 40 years and still not really anything worrisome about it. And it's making the microbiome return to normal. Now, when you add neomycin, if you're talking about resistance, Rifaximin has a very special quality. What it does is it goes into the bacteria and it blocks the synthesis of plasmids. Now I'm getting really into deep, dark secrets of the microbiome. And plasmids are what carry resistance genes. So if it can't make plasmids, it can't make resistance. If it can't make resistance, if you take rifaximin and neomycin together, and Herb DuPont, who's a well-known, he's a senior person, studied this, they don't get resistant to neomycin if you're taking rifaximin at the same time. And I would imagine the same is true with metronidazole. So rifaximin blocks resistance developing to the other drug you're taking at the same time.
Thank you.
Now, neomycin, though, it's in a category drug called aminoglycosides, which can affect kidney and ears if you take it for a long period of time intravenously. We're not giving it intravenously, we're giving it for 14 days. If you took neomycin for a year, like they used to do in the 1970s for people with liver failure, you can get hearing, ringing in the ears and stuff like that. But we're giving it for 14 days. Never seen a patient with ringing in the ears except for one who was in a study, first patient in the study of the neomycin rifaximin study. The FDA demanded that we put the ringing in the ears thing in the questionnaire. And the patient says, I think I have ringing in the ears. We stopped the drugs, quit the trial. And 2 days later, they had a really bad cold. So it was the cold that came. We repeated the ear test after the study, and their hearing was better after the study than before the study. So I cannot say neomycin makes hearing better, but I can tell you it didn't make that patient's worse. And so that was the end of that. But my point is, it's a categorical problem with neomycin, but it has to be intravenous to cause that in any short period of time treatment. So.
Okay,
Somebody-
let me piggyback on this because
Yeah.
this is exactly what I wanted to bring up. The amazing study you published showing how the microbiome is not harmed from rifaximin. And now you've just beautifully explained about neomycin and metronidazole. But it was really incredible in this study because you went deeper than ever before measuring, and you found that really it was the same from before and after, except for like less than 3%, I think, reduction in diversity. And it was only the E. coli and Klebsiella basically that went down. It was the only little bit that shifted was the exact target bacteria that are the overgrown bacteria. And in fact, I even took a screenshot of one of your slides. I can just share it right now. Is so you shared one of them in this sequence. This one right here. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
It's a bit
Yeah.
small. But Mark, can you just explain this difference here, Mark?
Yeah, so basically on the left, the circles are highlighting the organisms that are on the right, basically. But statistically, the bugs that are causing SIBO, as I've shown you in the rest of the presentation today, in that list for ESO and SIBO, are E. coli and Klebsiella, and they are more reduced with the rifaximin and NAC group. So this is smaller than this, right? That's the size of the wedge. And this is bigger than this. Smaller is better for these organisms. So that's basically what we're trying to show here, is that these organisms are preferentially reduced when you take the rifaximin and NAC.
Great,
Yeah, and
great terminology, preferentially reduced. I love
yeah,
it.
this rifaximin and NAC is just absolutely amazing. And now you have the study that was done in humans, so
Yeah,
last
this is a
year,
human trial.
yeah, last year it was animals,
Exactly.
now it's humans. But I remember you mentioning before it was a special preparation of rifaximin and NAC because everyone has been running out immediately and adding NAC to
Of
their
course,
rifaximin.
I've heard that. Yes.
Yeah, and so say
I
what
don't
you
know
want to
what
say.
kind of experience people are having, but happy to hear about it.
Well, what we suggested, we asked Dr. Ali Rezai when we were interviewing him last is, could maybe sustained release NAC be helpful over regular NAC? Because basically talk a little bit about your special preparation.
So the new drug that's being tested, or the new composition that's being tested starting in August, it's already FDA approved to go forward. So we're just waiting for one contract with the pharmacy distributor. So it allows the NAC to get out of the stomach. So for those of you who know about NAC, and a lot of the physicians in the community know how NAC works, NAC binds to the mucus and then dissolves it, but as it does so, it gets consumed and then it's gone. So the stomach, if you've ever vomited and you see that stringy stuff that comes out after a vomit, not to be gross, that's all mucus. The stomach contains so much mucus. If the pill releases in the stomach, you're going to have all the NAC consumed, right, by all that mucus. I don't want that mucus. I want to get into the small intestine. So you have to have a delivery that allows that NAC to get along the small intestine, dissolve the mucus, then have the rifaximin come in after it, and then take care of business. So that's how it's designed essentially.
And so do you think sustained release NAC in the meantime is a reasonable thing to add?
Maybe. I mean, it's worth a try. I'd be curious to hear what people have experience with that. But we have it such that the NAC works first and then the rifaximin. So, I mean, you'd have to play with dosing and try and
Yeah,
figure out a way.
what dosing did you use?
So this was of NAC was 600 milligrams TID 3 times a day.
And the rifaximin, you also now tested using a lower dose of rifaximin.
Right. In fact, we know that the actual dose will be even lower than that.
And I think, what did you use? 200 3 times a day? Is that what you used?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that it's recommended for anybody to go out and change their rifaximin dosing right yet, because this is all in progress here.
It's in progress. Exactly.
Can we just describe what NAC is? We're saying NAC, so
N-acetylcysteine. It's a drug that's already FDA approved for treatment of over. It's right? It is sold as a supplement, although the FDA went back and forth with that recently, but I think it's back.
Yeah. Yes, I think it is too. Okay. So everybody's saying NAC, and somebody was saying the word NAD to me, and then I had to look it up because NAD. Okay, is that, and then it's like the nicotine thing. So yeah. I just want to clarify for people. Okay, you talked about diabetes being, that sugar contributing to SIBO. Last time we talked, we did talk about GLP-1s together and how it was troublesome for people who, because of the slowing of the motility, what do you say to people? Like, that's a tricky situation, right? I have metabolic resistance, insulin resistance. I want to be on a GLP. It slows my motility. What's a person to do? Any suggestions?
So last year, all I could say was, I don't know what it does. If it slows things down, maybe it starves the bacteria, but it's slowing things down. So generally that causes SIBO. This year, 2 studies at DDW, nothing we've done by other groups, it causes SIBO. So they were able to culture the small bowel in patients with GLP-1s, and there's more SIBO. So we can say that more definitively now. It's 2 studies. They haven't been published yet. They were just presented as posters, so we have to wait for full publication. But that's public information now. So GLP-1s are not good for SIBO, and may cause SIBO.
And any new thoughts on how to test somebody who's on those medicines with a breath test? I think last year you said wait a week, like don't take it for a week. Any new thoughts?
Well, we see those breath tests all the time now. Flatline. A lot of them are flat lines. So we know who's on a GLP-1. We're seeing a lot of those flat lines these days. Now, it won't affect your methane because methane isn't so dependent on the sugar. And it may not affect your hydrogen sulfide because that's less dependent, sort of in the middle. But it will definitely affect hydrogen. You wait a week. I wait a week and then try. If it's still flatlining, then you have to wait longer. But patients get really itchy not being on their GLP-1s when they've started down that path.
Just a very quick question here, just circle back on the elemental diet. What do you usually suggest for people to be on it for how many days?
It's 14 days. We actually tested this way back in 2004 on that paper. We did 7, 10, and 14 days prior to that paper being published. And even 10 was not as good as 14. Something happens between 10 and 14 that I think the bacteria have finally given up. No food is coming, and they just, whatever, they evacuate.
Love that part. Okay.
Siobhan, can I jump in with a few more?
Yes, I'm done with my questions.
I know, we always have so many.
We have 5 minutes left. I just want to honor Dr. Pimentel's time.
Of course. In one of so you had 3 amazing testing studies, abstracts that were out. So amazing. One of them that was looking at hydrogen sulfide, it looked like you were evaluating a level of 1.5 part per million as well as 2. It looked to me like you were still trying to figure out what is the best positive value. Any thoughts you want to share on that?
So as I said, hydrogen sulfide is tricky. So let's, 8 parts per million. If you were to walk into a mine that had 8 parts per million hydrogen sulfide in it, you would die. So 8 ppm is not good. But we're finding 1.5, 2, 3 in the breath. So what is going on in the gut? It must be higher, right? And it could be as much as 8 right there locally. But then if you have a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here, so if it's spotty, overall it's only 1.52. But so it's a little tricky for us to figure out whether it's they're like regional bacteria, they're just hanging out in different locations because what we do know is that if you're 1.5 to 2, you're already sick. The cells are sick. If you're over 2, the cells are really sick. And we've got some new data as we continue to accumulate people over 2.5 and 3, and that's really bad. Like the cells are, they're going into death mode, is what some of the signals indicate. So we know that it's a spectrum. We just don't know is because the human body produces hydrogen sulfide, by the way, a little bit. And so some of it is good. You need it to do some of the processing in the human cell. So we just don't know if 1.5 is creating an environment that is unhealthy or sort of like what you're already doing. And then 2 is where things tip over. But what we're seeing at 2 is definitely a dramatic difference. And we see that the diarrhea really starts to tip over at 2. But it can happen a little bit lower than that. But again, because it's regional, right? Sometimes in the colon, sometimes in the small bowel, sometimes both. We really want to nail it down. We can't say for sure what the threshold is, except I treat anything over 2 now.
Okay, so you're still using 2 as your
I'm using
possible.
2. The data are looking like 1.5, but I don't want to go there until we have more firm data. But are fairly firm that 2 is not good. 1.5 is, we're still working on it. So it's just like anything else. You have to figure out the science before you start to say, oh,
Change.
treat all 1.5, you start to treat too many people also, and you don't know what you're doing. And so I got to be careful with what we say.
Okay, I have one last question. One of your testing studies showed something that I think many practitioners already know, which is that the number one reason, I think you touched on this in your presentation, that people order breath tests is because of the symptom of bloating. Bloating being really the keynote symptom in SIBO and EMO and hydrogen ESO. So I just wanted to ask you, do you have any advice or any treatments like what to suggest for practitioners and patients of how to treat bloating? It's such a stubborn symptom. Other than, of course, treating, the gases that are there. Other than that, any recommendations?
Well, so there's bloating and then there's the sensation of bloating on top of the bloating. So what we're seeing with the hydrogen sulfide is it is causing hyperalgesia, which we always knew was there, but we didn't think it was coming from the brain, right? We thought it was something regional. If you're inflamed and it's like if you have an infection in your arm, you feel pain right there, right? So if you have all these bugs creating all this inflammatory chemicals being produced, you're going to have pain. Hydrogen sulfide really adds to that. So if I have this much gas, I may not feel it. If I have this much gas, I may not feel it. If I have this much gas, I will feel it. But if I have that middle gas plus hydrogen sulfide, maybe I'm feeling that more than a normal person might. You see, that's the visceral hyperalgesia dimension to it. And then on top of that, there's the antibody, which we're sort of putting as a sideshow today, but that antibody, the motility of the gut is still not working, and you can't clear the gas that does accumulate anyways. So I'm holding hope for the new drug 12 months from now, which would be able to get that antibody out. And maybe all of this other stuff goes away. You don't need it because you just get rid of the antibody and diarrhea, IBS goes away, and you just live your life normally again.
Yeah, but of
So
course, that's for the people who are positive on the antibody. Not everybody is. We have all these other causes.
there's always, unfortunately, will be people who don't fit the mold, and then we have to figure out what their particular mold is and try and sort that out. So yeah, I mean, there's always going to be leftover people who sadly don't fit into the buckets, but
just any like clinical tips for just managing the symptom? Like sometimes I use charcoal,
yeah, I mean, charcoal, Iberogast sometimes helps. A Trantil sometimes helps, especially if there's methane. You and I've talked about um, um, uh, Alimed as a way of getting the methane down. I use prokinetics a lot. Prokinetics push that air out, especially at night. You use it a lot. I use it a lot at bedtime. That's my, and then sometimes pancreatic enzymes to help digest food, make less gas in there. So there's a whole list of things that can be used to try and mitigate the bloating if there's leftover bloating, especially if the breath test is normal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.